The number on my screen was wrong, and I knew it the second I saw it. It was a Thursday afternoon, a little after 3, and I had just opened my direct deposit notice the way I had on the 15th of every month for almost 20 years. My eyes went to the bottom line out of habit, and the bottom line was short. $1,140 short. My name is Karen Foster, and I had kept this company's network running for 19 years. I want you to understand what that morning had looked like before that check showed up. At 4:40 a.m., my phone had buzzed me awake. One of our core servers had crashed. Not a small crash. The kind that, if I had rolled over and gone back to sleep, would have stopped every shipment we touched across 4 states by the time the sun came up. Trucks would have sat in lots. Loading docks would have frozen. Customers who paid us millions a year would have started calling by 7, so I got up. I drove in while it was still dark. I sat in that cold server room with my coffee going cold beside me, and I worked the problem until the lights came back green. By the time the rest of the building strolled in around 9, sipping their lattes, everything was running like nothing had ever happened. That was the point. That was always the point. When I did my job right, it looked like I had done nothing at all. And my reward for that morning was a check that was $1,100 light. I sat there for a minute. I didn't get angry. That surprised even me. I just felt this cold, quiet thing settle in my chest. Then I stood up, smoothed my blouse, and walked down the hall to HR. The HR director was a woman named Brooke Talley. She was 31 years old. She had been in that director's chair for about 8 months. And before that, she had done something in marketing that nobody could quite explain to me. Her office had a glass wall and a little potted plant and a coffee mug that said, Boss Energy. When I knocked on the frame of her open door, she did not look up. Hi, Brooke, I said. There's a problem with my pays this period. I'm short $1,140. She kept her eyes on her phone, scrolled with her thumb. Then, still not looking at me, she said, It's not a mistake, Karen. That's the deduction for unapproved overtime. I stood there. Unapproved overtime, I repeated. Right. Now she glanced up. Just for a second, the way you look at someone holding the door when you don't want to say thank you. Going forward, fixes need a ticket first. You can't just decide to come in and rack up hours. Everything has to go through the proper channel now. That's the new policy. I thought about the server. I thought about 4:40 in the morning. I thought about the 4 states worth of trucks that did not sit empty because I drove in while the rest of them slept. I thought about telling her all of it. I didn't. There is a moment when you have been somewhere a long time, when you stop expecting the people in charge to understand what you actually do. You stop explaining yourself. Explaining yourself starts to feel like begging, and I was too tired to beg and far too proud. So I looked at Brooke Talley, 31 years old, with her Boss Energy mug and her phone in her hand, and I said one word, understood. Then I turned around and walked back to my desk. I want to be honest with you about something. People hear a story like this, and they picture the woman storming out, slamming a door, saying something sharp on her way out so everybody hears it. That is not what happened. I didn't say anything sharp. I didn't slam anything. I sat back down at my desk, and I opened my email, and I went back to work like nothing had happened at all. But something had happened. Something had shifted, quietly, in a place no one in that building could see. Because here is the thing they did not know about me. Here is the thing nobody had bothered to ask in years. The whole company, every truck, every shipment, every dollar that moved through Halloran Freight Systems ran across a network that lived inside one person's head, mine. And by the next morning, that network would be locked. I should tell you how I got here because it matters. I came to Halloran Freight Systems 19 years ago, when the company was small enough that you could count the trucks in the lot from the front window. 8 of them. That was it. 8 trucks, a dispatcher named Earl, who chewed toothpicks, and a single dial-up modem that screamed every time it connected, sitting on a folding table in the back. Old Man Halloran hired me himself. He didn't know much about computers, but he knew the world was changing and he needed somebody who did. I was 29 then, hungry. I told him I could build him something that would grow with the company, and he shook my hand and said, Then build it, Karen, so I did. I built the network that runs this place. Not bought it, not ordered it from a catalog, built it. Every server, every connection, every line that ties the warehouses to the trucks, to the offices, to the customers. I designed it, one piece at a time over almost 20 years. When we went from 8 trucks to 400, the system grew because I grew it. When we opened new yards in new states, I wired them in at night so the day crews never lost a minute. Thousands of shipments move through this company every single day, and not one of them moves without touching something I made. For most of those years, I loved it. I won't pretend I didn't. There is a deep kind of pride in being the quiet reason a thing works. But love doesn't pay a mortgage. And I had a mortgage that scared me at night. A few years back, my husband, Daniel, got sick. The kind of sick that bills don't stop coming for, even after the person is gone. I refinanced our house to cover what the insurance wouldn't. I told myself it was fine, that I had a steady job, that I had been here forever, and I always would be. I have a daughter, too. Her name is Casey, and she starts college in the fall. Her tuition sits in front of me like a wall I have to climb. So when I tell you I stayed quite quiet in that HR office, understand that part of staying quiet was fear. I was 48 years old. I knew, in the back of my mind, that the world does not bend over to make room for a woman my age starting over. That fear had kept me polite for a long time. But somewhere in the last 2 years, the company I built a life inside had stopped seeing me. It started when the new leadership came in. The biggest of them was a man named Trevor Hauntz, our new operations VP. Trevor was maybe 38, with an MBA he mentioned in almost every sentence and a way of smiling that never reached his eyes. He talked about efficiency and lean structure and moving fast. In one of his first meetings, he stood up in front of everyone and called my department, the thing I had spent 19 years building, a cost center. A cost center. Like the lights ran themselves. Slowly, quietly, he started taking things away. First, it was meetings. I used to sit in the planning meetings because nothing got planned that didn't run across my systems. Then one day, I just wasn't invited anymore. Then it was my budget. He handed a big piece of it to a flashy outside vendor with a glossy logo and a sales team that took him to dinner. They promised Tim the moon. They promised him modernization. They had never once seen the inside of my server room. And here is what none of them understood, what none of them ever bothered to ask. In all those years of building, growing, fixing at 4 a.m., nobody had ever made me write it down. The master credentials, the deep architecture, the way the pieces truly fit together, all of it lived in one place. In my head, and in one encrypted file only I could open. They thought they could push me out and keep the machine. They had no idea the machine and I were the same thing. The all-hands meeting came on a Monday. They held it in the big room downstairs, the one with the folding chairs and the projector that never quite focused right. Trevor Hauntz stood up at the front in a suit that cost more than my car payment, and he clicked to a slide that said one word in giant letters. Modernization. I sat in the back. I had learned to sit in the back. For the next 40 minutes, Trevor talked about the future. He talked about how the company was finally going to leave the old ways behind. He talked about the new vendor, this slick outside firm, like they were saviors who had descended from the sky to rescue us from ourselves. He put up charts. He used words like scalable and next generation. And as he talked, I started to notice something that made my stomach turn cold. He was describing my systems. He was standing up there describing the network I had built with my own 2 hands over 19 years. The dispatch platform, the warehouse links, the failover design, all of it. And he was talking about it like the vendor had invented it. Like it had appeared out of nowhere the day he arrived. He never said my name, not once. He described my life's work to a room full of people and erased me from it in the same breath. And then he introduced Kyle. Kyle was 29. He worked for the vendor. He had a confident handshake and a haircut that probably had its own appointment. And Trevor put a hand on his shoulder and called him the future of our infrastructure. Kyle smiled and gave a little wave to the room. People clapped. I have been in some painful rooms in my life. I sat in a hospital and listened to a doctor tell me my husband had months, not years. So I know real pain, and I am not going to pretend a meeting compares to that. But there is a particular quiet kind of ache in watching a stranger get applause for the thing you bled for. Watching them put your work in a younger, shinier package and hand it to someone who has never once sat in that server room at 3 a.m. while the rest of the world slept. I clapped too, slowly. Because that is what you do when you have learned to sit in the back. Then Trevor said the line that finally told me the truth. As we move into this new structure, he said, smiling that smile that never reached his eyes, some of our legacy staff may need to prove their value. The market doesn't reward the past. It rewards the people ready for what's next. Legacy staff. He didn't look at me when he said it. He didn't have to. There was only one person in that room who had been there long enough to be a legacy. And I was sitting in the back of it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept turning the docked pay over in my mind, the $1,140. And somewhere around 2 in the morning, it finally clicked into place. The docked pay was not a mistake. It was not even really about overtime. It was a message. It was the first small push. A few days later, that suspicion got confirmed in a way I didn't expect. I have a friend in accounting, a woman named Rita, who has been here almost as long as I have. We get coffee sometimes. She doesn't gossip, which is exactly why I trust her. She stirred her cup for a long moment, and then she said quietly, without looking at me, "Karen, I shouldn't tell you this, but your position got flagged internally. They've got it marked for transition." Transition, that's the polite word for it. The word you use when you want to push someone out the door without saying push. And the timing was no accident either. I was 1 year away from my pension fully vesting. 1 year from a retention bonus I had earned by surviving 2 decades. If they pushed me out before that, the company kept the money. So that was the plan. Dock the pay, erase the work, crown the golden boy, mark the old woman for transition, and time it so they never had to pay her what she was owed. They thought I was a line item. They had no idea what they were standing on. Let me explain what I mean by that, because it is the heart of this whole story. When most people picture a company's computer network, they picture something simple. A few servers in a room. Some wires. A help desk you call when your email won't open. They think it is like the electricity, something that just exists, that any electrician could come fix if the old one quit. That is not how it worked at Halloran. What I built over 19 years was not a few servers in a room. It was a living thing, layered on top of itself year after year, growing as the company grew. When we were small, I built simple. When we got bigger, instead of tearing everything out and starting over, which would have cost a fortune and stopped the trucks for weeks, I built new pieces on top of the old ones and tied them together. Smart, cheap, the way you do it when the owner is watching every dollar and the work can never stop. But that kind of building leaves a secret behind. Over the years, the way all those pieces connected became something only I understood. There were configurations I had set by hand and never wrote down because there was never time. And because, honestly, no one ever asked. There were custom scripts I had written, little programs that ran quietly in the background that held the whole thing together. Some of them kicked in automatically when something went wrong and fixed it before a human even noticed. That those 4 a.m. crashes ended with green lights instead of dead trucks. Half the time, it wasn't even me awake fixing it. It was something I had built years ago, doing its job in the dark. And the keys to all of it, the deepest access, the master credentials, lived in 2 places. In my head. And in a single encrypted file that only I could open. Now here is the part that made my hands go cold when I finally understood it. The vendor's whole modernization plan was built on top of my system. It had to be. You cannot modernize something without first understanding what it is. But they had never asked me what it was. Trevor never sent them to me. Kyle, the future of our infrastructure, had never once sat down with me and said, "Karen, walk me through how this actually works." They had looked at the surface, the part you can see, and they had assumed the rest was simple underneath. It was not simple underneath. It was 19 years of me. I found out the rest by accident, the way you find out most important things. I still had access to the project files, because nobody had thought to take it away. And one evening I opened the vendor's cutover plan just to see what they intended to do. A cutover is when you switch from the old way to the new way. You flip the system over all at once or in stages from what it was to what it's going to be. It is the most dangerous thing you can do to a network. It is open heart surgery. If anything goes wrong, the patient is on the table with its chest open, and nobody who knows the anatomy. Their plan was set to run that very weekend, Saturday morning early when the building was empty, automatic. They had it scheduled to flip the whole core over while everyone was home. I read it twice. And the second time, I started to see all the places it would fail. They had assumed my old scripts would simply keep running in the new world. They wouldn't. They depended on things the new system was about to change. They had assumed the access systems would carry over clean. They wouldn't, because of a quirk in how I'd tied them together years ago. A quirk that lived only in my head. And worst of all, in the whole plan, I could not find a single test of the failover. The safety net. The thing you check first, before you ever flip the switch, so that if the new way breaks, you can fall back to the old way. They had never tested it. They didn't even seem to know it was there. I sat in my quiet kitchen with that plan open in front of me, and something in me went very still. For 19 years, I had been the person who quietly stopped these disasters before they happened. I would have caught all of this. I would have stayed up all weekend making sure the trucks rolled Monday morning, and no one ever knew how close it came. That was my job. That was who I was. And for the first time in 19 years, I asked myself a question I had never let myself ask. What would happen if I just didn't? I went in on Friday night, the night before the cutover. The building was empty by then. The day crew was long gone, off to their weekends, their kids, their dinners. The lot outside had a few trucks parked in neat rows under the oranges, and inside it was that deep kind of quiet a workplace only gets after hours, when the hum of the machines is the only thing left talking. I want to be very clear with you about what I did that night, because it matters to me that you understand it. I did not break anything. I did not plant anything. I did not reach into that system and twist a single wire to make it fail. I want you to hear that plainly, because it would have been easy, and it would have been wrong, and I am not that kind of woman. Daniel didn't marry that kind of woman, and I wasn't going to become her over a man like Trevor Hauntz. What I did was simpler, and in a way harder. I stopped saving them. For 19 years, I had been the invisible hand that caught things before they fell. I stayed late without being asked. I came in at 4 a.m. without being asked. I watched over that system on weekends, on holidays, on the night of my own husband's funeral, because some part of me believed that if I let go, even for a moment, everything would come apart. I had made myself the safety net, and the thing about being a safety net is that the people above you stop looking down. They walk the high wire like it's a sidewalk, because they have forgotten you are even there. So that Friday night, I took my hands off the wire. I sat at my desk and I wrote my resignation letter. Calm, short, professional. I dated it for Monday morning. I did not write it in anger. I wrote it the way you sign papers you have already cried over, with a steady hand and a quiet heart. Then I did the thing that I think saved me, in the end. I documented everything. I went back through 19 months of emails, and I pulled every single one where I had raised a concern and been ignored. Every warning about the vendor. Every note where I'd asked to be included in the cutover planning and gotten silence. Every ticket I had filed flagging a risk, sitting there closed with no answer. The time I wrote, in plain words, the failover has not been tested and this is dangerous, and got back nothing at all. I gathered it all into one clean file, not to attack anyone, just so that the truth would exist somewhere outside my own head, where no one could rewrite it later. And then I did the last thing, the small thing that meant the most. For years, I had personally volunteered to be the emergency contact on the core systems. When something broke at 3 a.m., the automated alerts didn't go to a help desk or a vendor. They came to my phone. I had set that up myself long ago because I trusted no one else to answer. That Friday night, I quietly removed myself. I took my name and my number off the emergency list. If the system screamed for help on Saturday morning, it would scream into an empty room. I sat there for a moment after I clicked save. I'd be lying if I told you I felt nothing. I felt grief, honestly. A real aching grief. This place had been my second home for almost 20 years. I had grown up inside it. I had survived the worst year of my life inside it. Letting go of it felt like letting go of a part of myself. But underneath the grief was something I hadn't felt in a very long time. It felt like air. It felt like the moment you finally put down something so heavy you'd forgotten you were carrying it. I gathered my few personal things from my desk. A photo of Casey. A photo of Daniel. A coffee mug, mine plain, no boss energy on it. I put them in a small box. The cutover was set to run automatically at 6 a.m. Saturday. No test of the failover. No undocumented scripts being watched, no safety net. I turned off my office light and I walked out into the quiet. For the first time in 19 years, I went home and turned my phone to silent. I slept that Saturday morning in a way I had not slept in years. The cutover started at 6 a.m. right on schedule, with no one watching. I was not there. I want you to picture it the way I picture it, because I have had a long time to imagine exactly how it went. At 6 a.m., the automatic process woke up and began flipping the company over from the old world to the new. For the first few minutes, I'm sure it looked fine. These things always look fine at the start. The new system came up. The screen's lit. Somewhere maybe, a vendor technician glanced at a dashboard and gave a thumbs up. And then the old scripts didn't run. The little programs I'd written over the years, the ones that held the connections together, the ones nobody knew existed, did not carry over into the new world the way the vendor had assumed they would. They depended on things the cutover had just changed, so one by one, quietly they stopped. And as they stopped, the things they had been holding up began to fall. The access systems locked first. The way I had tied the security together years ago had a quirk in it, a quirk that lived only in my head, and when the Qtover hit that quirk, the system did exactly what I had built it to do in a crisis. It locked everything down to protect itself. Doors that should have opened didn't. Logins that should have worked failed. The new people could not get in, because the keys they were using were not the real keys. The real keys were in my head, and my head was at home, asleep. Then the dispatch platform froze. That is the one that mattered. Dispatch is the brain that tells the trucks where to go. When it froze, the trucks stopped knowing where to go. Across 4 states, at loading docks and yards and warehouses, the morning shift showed up to move freight, and the screens in front of them said nothing. No routes, no assignments, nothing. Drivers sat in cabs with their engines running and no idea where to point them. Shipments that should have been rolling by 7 sat dead in their bays, and there was no failover, no safety net to fall back to. Because no one had ever tested it, and no one knew it was there, and the one person who did had taken her name off the call list the night before. I'll tell you when I finally looked at my phone. It was a little after 9. I had made myself coffee, real coffee, in my own plain mug, and I sat at my kitchen table and I turned the screen on. 41 missed calls. I scrolled through them slowly, the way you'd read the names on a list of people who suddenly remembered you exist. Trevor Huntz, Trevor Huntz, Trevor Huntz. 6 times the man who called my department a cost center, the man who said legacy staff would have to prove their value. Brooke Talley, 3 times. The HR director who couldn't look up from her phone now apparently could not stop dialing mine. Kyle. The future of our infrastructure, twice. I imagine the future of our infrastructure was having a difficult morning. The vendor's main line, over and over, and the voicemails. I listened to a few. They started professional. Karen, hi, it's Trevor. Give me a call when you can. We've got a small hiccup with the systems. By the 5th one, the professional was gone, and what was left underneath it was naked panic. Karen, I need you to call me back right now. Nothing is working. Nobody can get in. We don't, just call me please. Please. I had worked for that man for 2 years, and I am fairly sure that was the first time he had ever said please to me. I want to be honest about what I felt, because I think you'd see through me if I pretended. I did not feel joy, exactly. It was colder and quieter than joy. It was the feeling of watching the truth become visible after years of being told the truth was a lie. They had spent 2 years telling me, in 100 small ways, that I did not matter, that I was a cost, that the future belonged to younger, shinier people who had never seen the dark. And now the system itself was telling them, in the only language they truly understood, the language of stopped trucks and angry customers and money bleeding out by the minute, that they had been wrong. I did not lift a finger to make it happen. That is the part I hold on to. I did not break a single thing. All I did was stop carrying a weight they had forgotten I was carrying, and gravity did the rest. I set the phone face down on the table. I drank my coffee while it was still hot for the first time in 19 years, and then the calls I'd been waiting for, the ones that would change everything, started coming from a different kind of person entirely. By Saturday afternoon, the problem had left the building. That's the thing leadership never understands until it's too late. They think a network is an inside thing, something they can quietly fix in the dark and never speak of again. But a network that stops moving freight does not stay quiet. It reaches out into the world and grabs every customer you have by the collar. Our biggest client was a company that shipped refrigerated goods, food, things that spoil. They had trusted Halloran for 11 years, and a good part of that trust, though they never knew my name, was built on the simple fact that their freight always moved. Always. Through storms, through holidays, through 4 a.m. server crashes they never heard about. It moved because I made sure it moved. That Saturday, it did not move. And their product sat in a yard getting warmer by the hour. I found out later that their operations director called Trevor directly, and that the call was not a polite one. He told Trevor that if their freight was not moving by Monday, they would pull their contract, a multi-year deal worth more money than I will earn in my entire life, and they would tell every company they knew why. 2 other major accounts called with the same message before the sun went down. That is, when it stopped being an IT problem and became a survival problem. And survival problems do not stay with the operations VP, they go up. All the way up to the people who actually own the thing. The board got involved Saturday night. I know this because Rita, my friend in accounting, called me Sunday morning, and for once she wasn't whispering. Karen, she said, the whole place is on fire. The board called an emergency meeting. They want to know how this happened. and Trevor's story is falling apart. It fell apart because the truth is heavier than a story, and when enough weight comes down, the story is always the first thing to break. The board started asking simple questions, the kind Trevor had never had to answer before. How did this happen? Who approved the cutover? Was there a backup plan? Was it tested? And every honest answer pointed in a direction Trevor did not want anyone looking. No, the failover had not been tested. No, the person who built the system had not been part of the planning, yes. That person had resigned Friday. And why had she resigned? Then someone found the file. Remember, I had documented everything. Every warning, every ignored ticket, every email where I said in plain words that this was dangerous and got silence back. I had not sent it to the board. I hadn't needed to. It lived inside the company's own systems, in my sent folder, in closed tickets with my name on them, sitting there like fingerprints. When the board started digging into how this happened, they found a paper trail, months long, of one employee raising her hand again and again and being told to put it down. They found the warning that said the failover had not been tested, dated weeks before the cutover, ignored. And then someone, I never found out exactly who, put the last piece on the table. The pay deduction. The $1,140. They learned that the woman who had built the entire network, the woman who had warned them in writing, the woman who had quietly held the company together for 19 years, had been docked pay for coming in at 4 a.m. to stop a crash. They learned her position had been secretly flagged for transition, timed neatly to happen 1 year before her pension vested. I did not have to stand in front of that board and make a speech. I did not have to defend myself or name my enemies or prove my worth with raised voice and shaking hands. I have watched people try to win that way, and it almost never works. It's because anger looks the same as guilt to people who weren't there. Instead, the numbers spoke. The stopped truck spoke. The furious client spoke. My own quiet, careful record spoke. And together they said the one thing I had been trying to say for 2 years, in a voice far louder than mine had ever been. Trevor Hance had not been managing a cost center. He had been pushing out the foundation, and now everyone with the power to do something about it could finally see it. The phone rang Sunday afternoon. It was a number I didn't know. The voice on the other end belonged to a man named Arthur Vance. He was on the board. One of the original investors, someone who had known Old Man Halloran personally back when there were 8 trucks in the lot. I had met him maybe twice in 19 years. His voice was calm, but underneath the calm, I could hear something I had never once heard from anyone in leadership before. I could hear that he needed me. "Mrs. Foster," he said, "I'm sorry to call you on a Sunday. I think we've made some serious mistakes, and I'd very much like for you to come in tomorrow morning so we can talk." All of us, I told him I would come. Then I hung up and I sat in my kitchen for a long time, and I thought about what I actually wanted. I want to tell you about Monday morning, because it was not what you might expect. I did not walk in there to gloat. I did not rehearse cutting lines in the mirror. I put on my good blazer, the navy one Daniel always said made me look like I owned the place, and tie says I drove in while the rest of them were already awake and afraid. The room was full. The board. Arthur Vance at the head of the table. Trevor Hance off to the side, gray-faced, looking 10 years older than he had at that all-hands meeting. Brooke Talley by the wall, no phone in her hand for once, no boss energy anywhere on her, and me. They actually stood, some of them, when I came in. After 19 years of sitting in the back, I walked to the front. Arthur asked me plainly if I could fix it. I told him the truth. Yes, I could have the network back up in a matter of hours, because I knew where every key was buried, because the keys were in my head and always had been. But I told him I would not be coming back to the job I had left, not to that one. Then I set my terms, calmly, without raising my voice, because I had learned, finally, that real power never has to shout. First, the $1,140 they had docked, paid back in full, not because I needed it, but because it was the lie this whole thing started with, and lies need to be corrected at the root. Second, my full compensation restored and raised, my pension protected, my retention bonus honored, all of it in writing, all of it before I touched a single keyboard. Third, a real title, not legacy staff. Director of Infrastructure, reporting to the board, not to operations. The systems I had built would answer to me, and the so-called modernization would happen on my terms, at my pace, with the failover tested first, the way it should have been from the beginning. And fourth, I told them quietly that I would not work under Trevor Hance. I did not ask them to fire him. I didn't have to. I simply said I would not report to him and let the silence in the room do the math. Within the week, Trevor was gone, pursuing other opportunities, as the polite email put it. Brooke Talley kept her job, but her role was cut down to something small and supervised. The last I heard, she files reports for someone now, and she does not have a glass office anymore. They agreed to everything, every word. Arthur Vance shook my hand the way old man Halloran had shaken it 19 years before, and said, "Then fix it, Karen." And I did. The trucks rolled again by that afternoon. I want to leave you with the part that matters most, because it isn't the title, or the back pay, or the man in the expensive suit packing his office. That night, I sat at my kitchen table again, in the quiet, with a photo of Daniel in front of me. Casey's tuition was safe now. The mortgage that used to scare me at night didn't scare me anymore. The wall I'd been staring at had a door in it, after all. And I thought about how close I had come to begging for scraps from people who had already decided I was worth less than a line on a spreadsheet. Here is the lesson I carry out of all of it, and I'll say it as plainly as I know how. The most valuable people in any building are very often the quietest ones. The ones who fix things before you notice they were broken. The ones who make the hard thing look like nothing at all. And if you have to demand respect from someone, it was never really respect to begin with. But value is a different thing. Value can be ignored for a long time. It can be docked and erased and handed to a younger face. But sooner or later, value has a way of making itself impossible to ignore. I did not destroy anything that morning. I want you to remember that. I didn't break a single wire. I just stopped holding up a place that had forgotten I was the foundation. And the moment I let go, everyone finally saw exactly what I was.